All right, welcome back. You're watching News Check. Let's just get right into the conversation on GMO. Earlier this morning, my colleague Victor Law hosted Dr. Joel Ochieng, the head of agricultural biotechnology at the University of Nairobi. Obviously, the conversation being pro-GMO. I have another scientist on set. This one is anti or also cautious about GMO, and that is Daniel Wanjoke, the lead expert in terms of environmental conservation. And we'll just dive right in. Let's talk about GMO because this is the heat or the topic that is generating a lot of heat in the country. But much of it comes from concerns from Kenyans on whether GMO is healthy to eat. That's the first concern, is it?
Thank you. The question, thank you, JJ, for inviting me for this talk. It is quite an interesting one. And the interesting part of the discussion on GMO, there are two levels. Whether it is safe as a food. If you talk about the starch, the ugari from GMO, there might be no big difference between your normal ugari and the GMO ugari. There's literally almost no difference until you start investigating what has been added.
Okay.
Or for you to protect your maize in the farm from worms and other pests, you require to put in a toxin. A toxin is something like poison, which kills worms, or those armyworms, the one that are known to attack maize. So for you to kill this worm, you are being required to change the genetics of the maize. Yet you could have killed the worm physically using normal pyrethrum.
Yeah.
Pyrethrin is...
We use pesticides to deal with worms.
Yes.
For GMO now, you have to change the genetical modification.
So that you could now alter the taste of and the food of that maize to the worm, so that it doesn't grow. That's the kind of modification we don't really require. Because if I could grow the bacteria, because we know BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, is a common bacteria in the soil anywhere. I can grow it in my farm. I am a bacteria farmer, so I can talk with authority on this. Yeah. Why don't we grow BT, that is Bacillus thuringiensis, make a pesticide that we can apply on our farms? It is this laziness of us looking at a farm, only one person can operate a 100, 200-acre farm, where when you plant the seeds, you can go sit pretty until the harvest time. So you don't need weeding, you don't need spraying, you don't need any other crop husbandry. You just move in, you introduce maize, and that is the end of it. For a country like Kenya, where we have plenty of labor force, a lot of youths are jobless. Why do you want to use a chemical in the genetic of the maize to protect the crop instead of you actually doing a physical control of the pesticides, doing control of weeds? Like I keep on saying that every one of us was born to be a part of the food chain in your village. You may be in Nairobi, but your village requires you. At least once in a year, you go there and help them in the food production process. That way, we ensure we don't have to turn our parents into chemical farmers. Because chemical farming is coming in to bridge the gap of lack of labor force. I can tell you, the youths working in Nairobi would do better somewhere in Nyandarua helping the farmers in food production. But we are now here in town trying to look for white-collar jobs, while the village, the country cannot feed itself. That's why GMO maize does not fill a gap here in Africa that we should be filling. I know in Europe, in America, where much of the labor in the past has not been very easy to get, it's difficult to pay a farm hand in America. So they have actually moved to chemical farming. Roundup, the one that you use for weed killing. GMO is coming to fill that gap. But here in Africa, we don't have.
Listening to you, because the conversation is really on the health of these GMOs. If we were modifying it in that sense, then you're simply saying as a scientist then, GMO food is not healthy.
GMO food is not healthy, and in the past we have been encouraged to encompass or to embrace GMO because it was used on cotton. You are told, oh no, don't worry, it's only affecting the suit you are wearing could be made of GMO cotton. So we relaxed. What we forget is that other than the cotton in a cotton plant, we also consume cotton oil. We also have cotton seed cake that could end up in fed to animals, could end up in our food chain. So you are not safe just by saying that, oh, it's only being fed to animals. The aspect of introducing a new chemical in the environment that your genetics and my genetics is not able to handle, your digestive system is not able to handle, that is the problem. And nobody can tell you conclusively, including the scientists, what will be the consequence of having that chemical becoming the only source of food in the whole food chain. If we didn't have maize, we only had GMO maize, we didn't have the normal maize, what will we have lost? Will we have lost the opportunity of our future generations to benefit from wholesome food? What if we determine that the GMO molecule, the genetically modified chemical that is put in the food, was not safe for us? I remember telling about starch, which is just a normal molecule. But the alteration of a starch molecule from one that coils clockwise to one that coils anti-clockwise actually determines whether you are able to eat that food or not. So a genetic modification, even in natural, because that's a natural modification in the starch molecule, resulting in you completely being unable to access that food. Then it's at that level where we are listening. If it is possible to actually change the food chain, lose half of your food availability from maize or starch from your ugari, just because you can't digest a certain starch in that ugari. It means that if we have manually or mechanically introduced a new gene that changes the structure of the starch, we might lose our ability to digest that food. And that is what we are saying. A precautionary principle requires that we avoid it if we don't have enough evidence to back it up. And nobody has any evidence.
But listening to the members of parliament who were here, and I'm sure you caught a glimpse of what they were saying, taking a very cautionary approach towards the conversation on GMO, because you're caught up in a catch-22 situation. The two members of parliament are from Northeastern, where the drought situation is really serious and people suffering under the bane of drought. And you have a solution here in terms of GMO, even if proven with some of the complications you're talking about in terms of health. And one wonders, shouldn't then we say that GMO is a stopgap measure?
It is indeed a stopgap measure.
Okay.
It is, if someone is starving, even if you are from Northeastern and you are at the point of death, and someone offered you pork, you may forget that it is against the religion to take pork. But you may want to survive the night, and tomorrow you go back to your normal food. So this GMO, we are not opposing the 10 million metric tons or whatever they are going to be brought in for us to survive through this drought season. I would be the last person to advocate for no food unless there's non-GMO. The GMO food is okay for that now, for our to maintain our population in a condition that they are able to survive until next season when they can harvest their own food. But my opposition is actually very not even based on nutrition or our way of feeding, but in our environmental approach to how we maintain the ecosystem, what we introduce into our environment, and what is good for us. What may be good for us now, we can eat the ugari, GMO ugari. It won't kill all of us. Like someone said, there are so many other reasons for dying. But after we are done with this drought, let's move to a situation where we can say, we sanitize our food chain. We say our food will not be containing GMO unless it's an emergency.
All right.
Then we can also say we should embrace technologies that are more suitable for production of food in our part of the world, other than GMO. Because when I think about the argument for GMO, it's that it's quick to produce food, you can do more food, but nobody has even experimented with irrigation here in Africa. We have not actually done irrigation to improve our food production. We have seen Mwea in Kirinyaga suffering from lack of food, lack of water to irrigate their land. How can that happen in a country where we have an irrigation board?
All right.
So we are very far from stopping, moving to GMO as a solution to our food security.
Let me listen in to one of the proponents of GMO food and take you back just a bit. Dr. Joel Ochieng joins us once more on KBC. The question is GMO food healthy?
I will talk about the GM food that we have made in Kenya.
The one you've made in Kenya?
That's the one we have tested.
Okay.
There are obviously, what we have is that we have reciprocal regulatory regimes across the world. If a vehicle is inspected in Japan, it will be acceptable in Kenya. They don't have to inspect again. But I think because we have a heated debate and we have issues that concern human health, it's better to talk about what we have tested. More than what has been tested competently as well, but it's being brought from outside. Now, what we have tested here is BT maize. We have tested it in the labs when being prepared. We have tested it in confined field trials. We have tested it in national performance trials. We have tested it all safety tests by the developers ourselves. And then there is another testing done by none of the regulators. National Biosafety Authority, EFIS, and the others also do their own independent testing. And it has been approved to be safe. And in fact, if you leave Kenya alone, there is nowhere anywhere in the world where anybody living today or in the past has raised any issue with BT maize. The only issue that people have raised, and whether they're legitimate or not is another matter, is on Roundup tolerant maize, which we don't have here and which nobody's going to import. Yes.
Quite an interesting one, because Wanjoki, I don't know whether you're convinced on the aspect of BT maize, because he says he's not talking about all GMOs, he's talking about what they have tested here, and BT maize is good for your health.
For him to test any material in the environment in his lifetime, he cannot actually say that it's good enough.
Okay.
If I'm assuming he's 50 years, like I am, he could have started testing at 40 and has only lived with the product for 10 years.
Yeah.
That's not enough. That's not enough to say that this product is safe. But what we look at, I'm an environmentalist, not an agriculturist. The agronomy has its own input in terms of making life better for all of us. It's that my colleague here would rather use a genetic modification to manage a physical insect pest, the one that is causing, which I find very, very lazy. Let me use that one. Not him, but our way of thinking is lazy. And I look in this gallery, we have a lot of youths here. They should be part of our labor force, our food production labor force. He is eliminating human intervention in food production by introducing BT. We are being left with 5 million jobless youths who would actually be weeding his farm, keeping the crop, doing a crop husbandry.
Is in farming about less cost of production and more yields then?
It can't be. If you do that, and that's where he is now. He only wants to plant, and every other insect that come from neighboring farms, when it lands on his chamber, they're either dead or they just repaired. So he's protecting his crop by injecting a genetic composition that resists other insects. So it's not the best way to approach it. I would, at the BT Bacillus thing, I deal with a sister bacteria, and you've seen what I do. I would rather you used BT and sprayed it on our crops. That way we would spray to all of our crops, whether it is beans, maize, or whatever. That we are going to introduce the bacteria into the genetics. That's where the issue comes in,
All right.
the moral issue. And I give you, before we went on here, I will give you a good example. God allowed a horse and a donkey to breed. It's possible to breed. But what does that, what do we get? A mule. It could be good for you as a farmer who has done the breeding, because for the entire life of that animal, it will never breed. It will always be working for you. But he ensures that God ensures that it does never reproduce.
All right. Let me hold
That's why
that
GMO is.
Hold that up, because Dr. Joel Ocheng, I'm even seeing questions streaming in, because it appears like Kenyans have already decided where they want to go, some of them obviously, in terms of GMO. But let's respond to what Daniel has said, that you cannot claim to have a conclusive idea or a conclusive experiment that indeed BT maize is healthy.
Yes, the first issue is that we are born in this world and we eat so many things. Some of them cause allergies, others are okay. Now, if you are testing for any product, whether BT or not, first of all, there is meat inspection that is done on goats, on mutton, on beef, and all the acceptable domestic animals that we slaughter. They are inspected every morning. Even right now as we talk, there is an inspection going on at Dagoretti Corner, slaughterhouse. Does it mean that people died yesterday of meat? It's because their role is to assure safety of Kenyans. That testing is done to assure safety, and is done on an animal within 5 minutes, for your information. They test an animal for 5 minutes. That is depending on how detailed the test is. And usually it's as brief as 1 minute if you ask any meat inspector.
True.
The issue is that which gene are we using? We're using a gene from a harmless soil bacterium that he says very well he uses. Bacillus thuringiensis is saying he's using a sister bacterium. BT is a harmless bacterium. And that was what informed the use of that particular one. Because if you use something else that has no history of safe use, then you'll go back to testing for longer than your own life. Now, if I take beans and I want to add proteins into maize using beans, how much testing do I need? Almost nothing, because I've been eating beans anyway, and that's no problem. So I'm only testing the incorporation, whether the incorporation itself introduces anything new. If it introduces nothing new, I'm safe.
And which you discover does introduce anything new.
We test this thing in an extensive manner before a product is put in the market. The regulatory systems are very stringent, more than anything else being tested on Earth, GMO.
Okay.
So now, the issue is BT saying we rather use it to spray. We want to protect our environment. When you spray too much chemicals into the soil, you get pesticide load into the environment. And that becomes dangerous because it gets into the water bodies. That's why we decided to incorporate the gene instead into the maize plant for two reasons. One, protect the environment from load of insecticides. Two, protect the crop from pests that open up the way for fungal infection, which brings aflatoxin, which is a food safety issue. And three, now the farmer has to buy the BT pesticide to spray. So this is why we said spraying is not good. They are campaigning for organic. I thought so.
Yeah, campaigning for organic.
Yeah, so they should embrace this more because there's no spraying.
All right. Let me ask you a quick one here. There's a question that came from one of our viewers very quickly. If I can just get my question. Maize is basically carbohydrates. Is GMO maize something else? Does the chemical composition of carbohydrates change in the GMO maize?
No, it doesn't. When we test several things. We test nutritional component, we test agronomic components, and the maize, the GM maize and the ordinary maize is exactly the same agronomically and nutritionally. Test other nutritional components like the biochemical components, the biochemistry of that maize is exactly the same. That's why it has to be labeled for consumers to choose. Because other than labeling, there's no other way other than in a laboratory that you can tell this is GM maize. You can't tell.
You can't tell.
There is no way.
You know, before I come to you, Wanjoki, Dr. Joel, I want to understand. Because this fears about the health of, GMOs, that consuming GMOs is not healthy. And coming from science experts also opposed to this, just like you're a science expert supporting GMO. It cannot be unfounded.
Well,
it just can't be unfounded.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about the publication that led to the ban. Now, that publication, first of all, used rats. Of course, rats are very close to humans. That's why we use them as organisms. But there was a serious error. He used rats that are predisposed to develop tumors, whether they are fed on GM or not, whether they are fed on anything or not. That's one. And two, the same author has republished another one saying he has now found out that the contaminants in the feed that he had used was responsible for the tumors he observed. People are ignoring that. And in his own English word, and I can bring you the paper in the next 5 minutes when I leave here, because I have it in my car, is that he said in his language, which is English, simple one, that the tumors were emanating from the herbicide, glyphosate herbicide, the one we call Roundup, not the GM maize itself. Very clear sentence. But because this is now sold by the multinationals, you can't touch. Now they come and touch ours that we're developing. Because, I mean, this is...
Good and interesting. Well, Jack, I want to come back to you. First of all, there's that issue that has been raised when you talk about BT spray. And indeed, as an environmental scientist, I would assume that too much chemicals in the air is harmful to human beings. So spraying again gets ruled out. But there's also the question of, you think it is lazy. Dr. Joel thinks it is evolution of technology. That's where we are headed. You think the kind of farming of GMOs is lazy, so much that we have so many other choices. What are these choices that we have?
I would like, first of all, to mention that his assertion that the food is safe is not correct. That there is no alteration in the starch we interact with. But I am personally very allergic to mutton. If I took mutton here in the next 15 minutes, I'll be sick. That means I have to, every day, besides the meat inspection at Dagoretti Slaughterhouse, I personally must inspect and make sure that the animal I'm eating has a goat tail. That I have to do myself. And that's where, when you come to GMO, I should be able to choose whether I am eating mutton or goat. Because for me to eat mutton, it is actually a medical crisis. The other aspect is, you can't say that there is no change in the structure or the composition of the starch in a maize. I give you an example. Several million years ago, the starch in the maize you eat, the ugari you eat, there was a mutation, such that we have the L glucose and the D glucose. He knows about that. If you put a pure composition of the L glucose and you pass right through it, it deflects right to the left. If you do with the D glucose, it deflects to the other side. It therefore means that those two glucose are different. Structurally, molecular-wise, if you weigh them, they are the same. But the way it coils, the way that starch coils, is such that your enzymes will never unravel it. And that's why even when you eat a big chunk of ugari, half of that goes to the toilet. Because your body is not able to, your enzymes are not able to digest that starch, which has coiled with the head in and the tail out. So he has not had enough time to unravel the starch made from the BT maize.
Is this a matter of 2 minutes, 5 minutes?
No, it is not.
Okay.
Even what I'm talking about here is not in books. But we still get maize from Ukraine, we eat, we go to the toilet, and we manage the waste after that. Nobody has told you this, that half of your packet of ugari doesn't get digested just because there was a genetic modification. It might have been done by the dinosaurs, if the dinosaurs were scientists, to change it, and we may be suffering the consequence. We don't want you people to be the one to change the structure of our maize such that our great-great-grandchildren discover, oh, we are never able to access some of the starch in our maize because it has a BT and egg protein, which makes it impossible for me to digest it. That's what the precautionary principle we are working with. Let's work with mechanical removal of weeds, because GMO is good for us. But what did we see the last 3 months? Zebras, gazelles, giraffes died in a national park. What is their place? If you do GM maize and you don't change anything about the climate change, what is their take? What benefit will they have? You will be having your stomach full, but the climate is going wild, and the droughts are all over. You will not have sorted the we call it ecosystem problem that is being brought in by climate change.
Dr. Joel's response to that, because Wanjoka is concerned other than just the health aspect, which he says you cannot prove that indeed GMO is healthy. It's also the concern of the ecosystem. We're not just dealing with human beings here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, the first thing, I think we are also mixing up issues here. Let's not use the word GMO. Let's use specific names. I'm talking about BT maize.
BT maize.
And with BT maize, there's no spraying, there's no herbicide. Herbicides are used for weeding. In Kenyan system, the smallholders have very tiny piece of land. You don't need herbicides. So you don't need herbicide-tolerant maize variety. That's why we have the BT maize here. That is used for thousands of hectares in America, not here. So first, you should understand we're talking about BT maize. And second, is that as much as we cannot test for more than 200 years, some things are clear to know. I have done 3D structure of proteins and published that 2 months ago. 3-dimensional structure of proteins. And what causes allergy. It's published in the journal called Gene, which you can check at your free time. You can check even now. So I understand how allergy is caused very deeply, and I might help you in your situation. So the BT incorporation into the maize genome does not confer any nutritional change at all.
None at all?
None.
Okay.
I mean, even the regulators, you should believe, they test also. The developers test it, then the regulators take over. And they test the same things. And by the time they're certifying any crop to be safe and any product to be safe to be put on the market shelves, I'm sure you should believe it.
All right. One of the concerns they have is obviously the capacity for us. You're talking about BT maize. First of all, can you confirm to Kenyans that this technology is ours?
Now, the BT maize technology is a public-private partnership.
Okay.
There is no private company that owns it that will come back to you and say, you pay me royalty because you have used my gene.
So who owns it?
It's a PPP, public-private partnership. In other words, the government of Kenya,
Kenyan government?
The government of Kenya, the private sector, and the research groups. It's a partnership. It's not, GMO cannot be developed by an individual or just a single institution. No. It's one of the things that brings people together.
There's a point you said there was a mix-up of issues when you're talking about GMOs. But of course, I know your bias is towards the BT maize.
And which is locally prepared.
And which is locally available.
Yes.
But the ban lifted by government was on GMOs.
Yes, and I can explain that. What's happening is this. There is no ban that was lifted. I think that's something I wanted to clarify today.
Okay.
President Uhuru Kenyatta authorized the local cultivation of BT cotton, which is 60% food and feed, and only 40% lint. Lint is what we use in making clothes. Then, in this year, 2022, July, the Treasury CS gazetted importation of GM maize specifically. Specifically maize, not anything else. Now, when people talk about President Ruto lifting the ban, Ruto did not lift the ban. What Ruto did was to make it open so that people know you can now import. There's nothing opaque. Because in the other case, you could apply, then they told, no, there's a ban. The other guy applies, it's allowed. So now, open playing ground is what Ruto has done. Open governance system, where now people know their fate. I know it's now legal, I can import.
All right.
And if you deny me, I want to know why.
Wanjoka, part of the accusation that faces the proponents of GMO is the fear that there is a silent monopolization of seed supply. And I'm talking about GMO now, not just the BT maize, because that's a conversation we'll have in future about GMO maize, that there is a silent plot to monopolize the supply of seeds. And what that does eventually, again, is compromise the food security of a country.
That is true. When he gives me his BT maize, can I call it BT maize or GMO?
BT maize.
BT maize.
Yes.
He comes to ensure that my crop is thriving, isn't it? That my crop is thriving. and he has the right to come and eliminate some of the spots. These are crops that grow out of his expectation. He'll pluck them out. It's true or false?
Why?
He'll pluck them out because he will say, this is not what I expected from my seed. He is also going to influence what I do with that seed. I cannot give it to my neighbor. Okay. And if I want to even tithe it in my local church, like I say,
you can.
He has an influence on what I do with that maize. True or false?
No, I think you're mixing up issues. There's Seed Variety Act, which was put in place in 2016.
Yeah,
it covers all seeds, not GMO seeds. All seeds. If that's what you're referring to, can you tell Kenyans you're talking about seeds as a whole, not GM seeds?
No. When I buy the variety,
maize was
Duma
an example.
614 variety, I planted.
Yes.
The Kenya Seed Company doesn't care what I do with that crop. But I'm in possession of a contract. I have a farm, a big farm. I would like to do maize. But the people who have offered to offer me seeds want to dictate the kind of how I treat even the crops in my farm. They even talk about destruction of a male seed from the farm, and that cannot be fed to animals. That's a kind of control we fear from the multinationals that are bringing us the option of seed, GMO maize or BT maize, and that is the loss of food security for us because in the past I kept part of my seeds from the previous crop and I could plant them again.
Yeah.
I could give it to my neighbors, but with the GMO,
the controls.
Yeah, the control. It actually takes away that right to even share seeds among farmers. That's true. It also eliminates the possibility of me carrying over the seed to the next year.
All right. Let me cut you short because we are almost nearing winding up and respond to that because what he's saying is not far-fetched. There's something happening in Narok where a person doing the farming of the maize you're talking about, the next neighbor cannot plant different maize because they are accused of compromising
the genetic material.
This other maize. Have you heard that?
No. I've not heard of that because first of all, before you even talk, we have not commercially released BT maize.
Okay.
Not yet. It's still under KFIS.
Is it the only one being farmed in Kenya?
There's no other maize in Kenya that is being farmed as we talk today.
You can confirm that?
There's none.
All right.
Akuna. The one that you're talking about, there are two varieties of BT maize now, and they are all under KFIS being given variety name before being commercialized. So in people's farms, there is no BT maize at all. So the Narok case is a strange one, and they should tell us where they got it from.
There's no BT maize commercialized in Kenya?
No, there's none.
Quite an interesting one, because the conversation that is coming from the ends of Narok is something different in terms
I think they're talking about hybrid.
Yeah?
Hybrid maize, maybe.
Hybrid?
Maybe they're talking about hybrid. You know, people say anything they want to say. They should tell us, can you contact NBA and ask them whether they have released any for commercial release? There's none.
You're confirming there's no variety whatsoever?
No, there's none.
Other than, there's BT maize, the one that you said is a PPP.
Yes.
There's no other variety of GMO in Kenya?
No, there's none.
Okay.
Quite interesting.
If he knows one, let him tell us.
What we could say, the Swahili say that kiona kichwa cha mwenzako kinyelewa chako kitiria maji. If the controls on hybrid are so strict, how about when I am the only one producing this seed? Because hybrid could be different from different companies. What about when there's only one company producing the GMO maize, his company, and he is the only one who has the key to our lack or lack of it, of drought in the country. If you are the only one controlling the possibility of food shortage in the country, then the rules would be very strict. And it is what we are saying. We don't want to lose that ability to decide what to grow and when to grow it, and what to do with the produce from our farms. That is what we are saying. Maybe BT maize may be good, but are there other options? What has changed? We should be changing the climate that is forcing him to do BT maize. We should be restoring back our environment.
Restoring back the climate.
So that crops that our grandmothers grew could still be doing, cassava, sorghum and stuff.
All right, a very quick one. I know you need to respond on the controls, yes.
Yes, I think we need to separate myths from reality. It was clear and made clear by the government that the BT maize will be distributed by the Kenya Seed Company, which is a national institution from which we have been buying other seeds like hybrid seeds for a long time. I wonder why this becomes difficult if it is BT maize, for example, under the same regime. What exactly is the issue? And in fact, once you buy
so you're
seeds,
confirming there are controls?
Controls are very stringent, they're there. Because you'll come and say, my neighbor planted BT maize and he didn't give a buffer zone. So there are controls in place. There is what we call environmental release regulations, which are followed to the letter. And those controls, you can make a choice whether to plant BT maize or whether to plant the other normal maize. There's nobody who can force you.
The environmental lease, the one that you're talking about, the environmental lease, does it affect the other person near you?
No, the issue is, there is a seed variety, the Seed Variety Act, which was put in place a few years ago. It talks about all seeds, not BT,
not just BT,
not GMO, not BT.
Okay.
So if we have, you cannot happy with that law, we have to change that law. It doesn't cover GMO, it covers seeds.
Okay.
So let nobody use that opportunity to demonize GM seeds only.
I think I should have both of you here next week or the day after, because it's quite an interesting conversation, so that we deal with the facts on your end, the facts on the other end. Dr. Joel Ochieng is the head of agricultural biotechnology at the University of Nairobi, APRO GMO. And then Daniel Wanjoki is the lead expert on environmental conservation, the CEO EcoSave Africa, and GMO, and clearly, as you can tell, they're both scientists, but still can't agree on whether we go GMO or not. But this is where we have to put a cap on News Check this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Up next is Gladys Mungai with Tamrini and Kurunzi Mashinani. Don't go too far. Have yourself a fantastic afternoon.